We're going to have a very nice topic now on the requirements for a prescription to be legal and valid in South Africa. So our next presenter, Sarah Opsahl, is a pharmacist, and I actually met her while we were busy filling a prescription. And it was a long prescription, and we were talking about how frustrated she was about how doctors prescribed, and how that if they have to send a prescription back because it's faulty, they'll send everyone back, because doctors do not necessarily prescribe correctly. And I was quite astonished by this, and I said to her, well, you have to come and talk about it. So Sarah is a retail pharmacist currently working in the capacity of responsible pharmacist and pharmacy manager within the Clicks Group. Sarah qualified with a Bachelors in Pharmacy at Nelson Mandela University in 2017. She did her internship and community service years in government hospitals, and then moved into the private retail sector in 2020, where she has since remained. Working in the private retail sector has allowed Sarah to come into contact with a wide variety of patients and prescribers alike, and has provided her with certain insights into the practice and how it may be improved. In order to further enhance her contributions to the pharmacy profession, as well as her local community, Sarah is currently pursuing her PCDT, a postgraduate qualification at NWU, enabling pharmacists to treat patients with the standard treatment guideline and essential medicine list frameworks. Although Sarah is still a young, budding pharmacist, she has an overwhelming passion for her profession and her patients. She strongly believes that there is great value in multidisciplinary cooperation for both patients and professionals. Sarah, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to hand the stage over to you. Please stay, listen to this, learn from it. We don't want to have issues with her sending your prescriptions back. Thank you, Sarah. It's all yours.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for giving me your time and your attention this afternoon. As Joey said, today I'll be speaking just on some of the legal requirements for a prescription in South Africa and why. Okay, a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we're going to be up soon. So I am aware that my topic is somewhat on the boring side, and I dare say potentially inflammatory, but I hope we can have a bit of an informal presentation today, just regarding this difficult yet vital area. My goal today is to bring attention towards some of the potentially unknown struggles in the pharmacy. I do apologize in advance if I do trample on any toes. It is definitely not my intention to single out or attack anyone who prescribes and maybe is not adhering to all of the requirements. I just hope that we can work together to ensure that our practice is effective, efficient. Let's just see if we can get the presentation going. There we go, we're winning. All right, done that. Okay, so just a quick overview. As you can see, we'll be going over your minimum legal requirements for a prescription. We'll be looking just a little bit at the pharmacist's role in dispensing a prescription in the hopes that it will just give some context. And then we'll be going through some commonly encountered areas with regards to this in the pharmacy. All the information that I provide today regarding these requirements will be taken directly from your general regulations, Regulation 33 of the Medicines and Related Substances Act of 1965. So they are considered law in South Africa. This is publicly available through multiple government websites, including the South African Pharmacy website. All right, just to start with number 1, every prescription shall be written in a legible print or otherwise typed, or alternatively using one of the many available electronic options. I would like to just take this opportunity to emphasize that a prescription is a legal document, and then it should be, viewed with the respect and the seriousness of a legal document. Some of the things that I'm going to say will appear obvious, but I do just want to get through the regulations as they stand, and then we'll discuss a little bit more in depth. Okay, and point number 2, a prescription must be signed by an authorized prescriber, either good old-fashioned pen and paper, or we use our electronically advanced electronic signatures. So just a point from the pharmacy side, there are a lot of online options whereby you can quote unquote copy paste or insert a signature. And a lot of prescribers are using that. The problem with that when it's not something like an EM guidance platform is that when the patient gets to the pharmacy, all we see is a printed prescription with a printed signature. So in the case of a Schedule 5 or something like that, the problem comes in where the pharmacist is not able to determine whether or not the patient has first gone home, made a photocopy of that prescription, and then presented it at the pharmacy and potentially presented it to multiple pharmacies. So although these electronic signatures are useful, especially when you are using an electronic prescribing platform, there are some challenges at pharmacy level with them. Okay, moving on to point 3. The minimum should at least appear on a prescription, being the prescriber details, name, qualification. Something that we've noted in the pharmacy, the legal requirement is your MP number, not necessarily your PR number. Happily, please put your PR number on the prescription. It is very important in terms of your medical aid claiming, but the legal requirement is for your individual MP number to appear on the prescription. We need a practice address and we need a contact number should we need to query anything. Then in terms of your patient details, also pretty self-explanatory. We need a name, preferably in full, and a surname. We often find in the pharmacy, if you just put an initial, it can get tricky. Sometimes there are multiple patients at my pharmacy who will have the same initial and surname, although their first name may be different. In order to ensure that a patient's medical history is loaded on the correct profile, it is a lot easier if the script is more concise. Then we also have instances, especially in big families, where there are multiple family members who have the same initial and then the same surname. It becomes a little bit tricky in just ensuring that that the medication is loaded onto the correct profile. Of course, we do these checks and we do enforce these checks, but just, a point. Then next we have identification number and a date of birth in case of a minor. This is almost never recorded on a written prescription. It is actually quite important, especially if you take into consideration that we're talking about a legal document. And also then it helps with the verification process, again, ensuring that the correct medicine is charged to the correct patient, especially when we're dealing with medical aids and that kind of a thing. We need the patient's home address on the prescription. Again, something that is not often there. This is not a point that I particularly drive home to badly in my pharmacy. If I need to add it, I can verbally ask the patient. But it is just something in a sense where, when it comes to medicine safety, the patient must be traceable. Okay, and then age and gender, although typically you can get gender from the name or the patient in front of you, and age you can extrapolate from the date of birth or the ID number. Okay, then in terms of the medication and the script itself, obviously we need a date. Sometimes prescribers forget. We usually just give a ring and confirm that the patient did see the doctor on that day. But again, that's, extra time, a little bit time consuming. Then we need either the trade name, your preferred trade name of the medication, or its generic name. The desired dosage form is very important, especially when looking at your pediatric formulations. One of my favorites is your amoxicillin augmentin considerations. You get amoxicillin S, amoxicillin SF, you get augmentin S, you get augmentin SF, augmentin ES, augmentin BD, you get the point. So a 5 ml of one definitely does not constitute a 5 ml of another. So if you do not specify, we absolutely have to confirm. We cannot guess. It also is important in terms of your ointment versus cream versus gel. Not always a huge consideration, but an example would be your Retin A, where your cream and your gel actually have completely different concentrations. So if the prescriber doesn't specify, we would then have to phone and confirm which one they meant. Okay, then the desired strength or dosage that you are looking for. We are also then looking for the quantity of the medicine to be supplied, not just the duration of therapy. So In some cases, it is okay to put either or, although the requirements is for both. But especially in the case of PRN, I see it a lot with painkiller prescriptions. The doctor will say 2 TDS PRN, and then sometimes forget to say how many days or a full quantity. So in that sense, I mean, when we're looking at a Schedule 5, it becomes a bit tricky. Sometimes we will try and match it. If maybe there was an antibiotic and the antibiotic is for 5 or 7 days, we will try to match it. If we can't get hold of the prescriber, sometimes in the case of a casualty prescription, it's very difficult to get hold of the prescriber. We will then assume a 5-day supply. But in pharmacy, we love to assume as little as possible. We definitely do not want to take on the role of a prescriber in any way, shape, or form. All right, and then just in terms of your Schedule 6 prescriptions, this is very commonly known, but the total quantity of tablets must be reflected in both figures and words. It's not necessarily every single number present on the prescription. So in the case of a Concerta 36, that 36 does not have to be represented in words as well. It's actually just the total quantity. So in terms of a Schedule 6, if you actually just write 1 tablet daily for a month, that prescription is strictly not valid because, again, I am not supposed to be assuming how many tablets you want me to provide, especially in a case of Schedule 6 where we do not have wiggle room for error. Okay, moving on. Point number 4 in the regulations. This is now just a little bit more to do with what the pharmacist has to do. We have to verify the authenticity of the prescription. Very often, we get used to our doctors in the area, our prescribers in the area. We get used to your handwriting. We get used to your signatures. Sometimes I even know which pen my doctor prefers to use. So in that sense, we will evaluate the prescription and see that everything is as it should be. Again, this sort of denotes to those electronic signatures where things get a little bit difficult to ensure that the prescription is authentic, that it hasn't been filled yet. And then your emailed and fax prescriptions are ever so slightly problematic in this sense, but I will touch on that a little bit later. Then just a quick one, your verbal prescriptions, again, potentially problematic in the way that they are handled. Here, I'm just showing you what the regulations actually say, but I would like to just talk about this in a little bit more detail later. I would just like to point out specifically your verbal prescriptions may not exceed a 7-day supply. You often have a prescriber trying to give a chronic prescription or a repeat prescription verbally. Unfortunately, the law does not allow for that. And secondly, the last thing I'd like to just specifically point out now is that your Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 verbal prescriptions are viewed as an emergency supply. So it is not a prescription in that sense. We may only give a 48-hour supply, not a 7-day supply, and it must, absolutely must be followed up with a written prescription within 7 days. Okay. Moving on to the responsibilities of the pharmacist, I'm going to focus mostly on phase 1 of the dispensing process. Like I said a little bit earlier when we were waiting, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I just want to highlight part of what is required from us as pharmacists in the hopes that it will give you some context into the struggles that I mentioned so that I'm not just a pharmacist who's whining at you. Okay, phase 1 of the dispensing process is to interpret and evaluate the prescription. This part of the dispensing process may only be done by a pharmacist. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is why each and every prescription must be viewed and signed off by a pharmacist, even if the dispensing process happens out of order. For example, sometimes a patient will come and they'll be helped by an assistant. The assistant will process everything and then the pharmacist will see it afterwards. If we at that stage pick up any issues, we will have to go back and revise, phone the doctor, whatever needs to be done. Okay. So here we identify obviously the patient and we identify the prescriber, ensuring that both are correct. Then we have to ensure the legality and authenticity of the prescription. Now this notes back to all the things that I noted in what needs to be on a prescription. They marry to each other. If we need to confirm anything, we have to confirm with the prescriber. Okay. We need to then look at your, interpret the treatment type and the prescriber's intentions. So here, very often an ICD-10 code helps. I know we don't always use them, but it's very useful, especially when the patient does not have a very in-depth grasp of their diagnosis, which does unfortunately happen. Although ICD-10 codes are not a requirement, they are just useful in that sense. We have to then identify the medications and all of the requirements of the medications, the dosage form, etc., etc. Once we have done all of that, we will then select the appropriate or the most appropriate medication to be dispensed and take it from there. Now, if we can talk a little bit about generic substitutions. I know for a lot of prescribers, the word generic is a swear word. I know it's a testy topic, and I have my own reservations about certain substitutions, despite being pro-generic myself. I believe patients should be treated individually, and their experiences and preferences should be acknowledged and respected. However, if I, as a pharmacist, fail to offer a patient a generic, I am in contravention of my legal responsibility as a dispenser. It is a legal requirement for a pharmacist to inform their patients of the benefits and implications of generic substitutions. It is not just for my own potential benefit or my pharmacy's potential benefit or for the stock that I have on hand. It is a legal requirement. So although I am aware and respectful of the prescriber's preferences, I must honor my obligations to my patient. I actually work very closely hand in hand with a doctor who does not like generics. I am incredibly aware of it, and I know I get into trouble every time his patients go back and tell him that they took a generic and they are not feeling well still. But I usually just ward it off by saying, I know Dr. XYZ does not prefer generics. However, I must legally ask you, and the choice is yours. Would you like a generic or an original? And then the onus is on the patient to make their decision. Okay, let me just get myself back on track here. Okay, in terms of the law, a pharmacist must, not may or can, or if they want to, a pharmacist must dispense a generic unless the retail price is higher than the prescribed medication. We may not substitute a more expensive equivalent unless there are extenuating circumstances, for example, an absolute complete stock outage. Okay. Unless the product has been declared non-substitutable. So I will not be substituting warfarin, those kinds of things, whatever the Department of Health has deemed non-substitutable. Unless it is forbidden by the patient. They said no. We move on. I don't try and convince you. I don't try and argue with you. I ask you, do you want it? Don't you want it? I tell you what it is. If you say no, that's it. That's the answer. And then unless the prescriber has handwritten, the law has not caught up yet, handwritten, no substitution next to the item prescribed. I would like to just take a moment to point out here that blanket statements for an entire prescription and printed statements of no substitution may actually legally be waived at the instruction of the patient. No sensible pharmacist would ever go out of their way to ignore a no substitution instruction. But should the patient insist, it is then again my legal obligation to pick up the phone and have a discussion with you regarding the fact that your patient does not want specifically the item that you prescribed. So here it's a very dangerous, narrow tightrope that we have to walk to ensure that we maintain the trust of our patients, of our prescribers, that we maintain a professional relationship with our prescribers. It doesn't happen often. Okay, then just quick, the other part of what we have to do, we have to assess and ensure the optimal use of medicine. So when we are phoning you, querying your prescription, it's not because we are being difficult. We are not operating outside of our scope. We are just ensuring that the best therapeutic outcomes are achieved. We are looking at medicine safety. We are looking at possible contraindications, drug-drug interactions, drug-disease interactions, duplicate treatments. So often you have patients seeing multiple prescribers. They do not always disclose everything that each prescriber is giving them. Who does get disclosed to is the pharmacist. So we often then see a full history, whereas the prescriber sometimes does not. So we will then every now and then pick up an issue that we would like to bring to your attention and discuss with you. Okay, and then in terms of appropriateness for the individual, for the indication, same sort of situation. Okay. In the case of uncertainty or issue with any of the above mentioned things, it is then required that the pharmacist make every effort possible to contact the prescriber and have that discussion. If it is impossible and the pharmacist is unable to reach the prescriber, we then have to make a professional call based on our judgment. If there is a potential risk to the patient, we may say, no, I'm not willing to dispense this prescription. We may give... The other day, I had a situation where a doctor prescribed ENAP-CO 10 milligram by 12.5 milligram. That dosage form doesn't exist. It's a 20 by 12.5. I could not reach the prescriber. The patient's blood pressure was high. So I was not comfortable not giving her anything. So I gave her 2 tablets of the enalapril and 2 tablets of the hydrochlorothiazide in the dosage that doctor wanted until I could confirm if doctor actually wanted a 10 milligram dose or if he wanted the combination of the 20 milligram. So, we have to sort of take those risks. I am taking a risk in giving something I'm unsure of, but it's far worse for me to leave that patient and have a potential stroke than to give something that I know can help them. Okay, so that's just a little bit of context. All actions taken, whether they were successful or not successful, must be noted on the prescription. Okay. Now, just to look at some commonly encountered issues, this is where I hope I'm not going to step on any toes. Please remember, this is completely non-individual. Okay. When looking at everything we've spoken about so far, in my opinion, in my pharmacy that I manage, these are my sort of quote-unquote non-negotiables. Okay. So if these are missing from the script, I have to do something. Okay. The date. It happens. Okay. Like I said a little bit earlier, we will usually phone the practice, chat to the receptionist, confirm that the patient actually consulted with the doctor, then I'm okay with that. If I can't confirm that, I have to speak to the prescriber themselves. The name of the patient, whether it's missing or incorrect. Sometimes I've seen a prescriber end up putting the parent's name instead of the child's name. Then you can see it's very obviously a pediatric prescription. In such cases, again, I will just phone and confirm and make sure that everything is as it should be. Okay, the name of the prescriber. Now, typically you guys have got your script pads that have got your names and everything. What I'm talking about here is a situation potentially in a practice where there are multiple prescribers. Sometimes that practice will then have a little list of the names that the doctor can just circle. Sometimes they forget to circle it. I just circle it. That's not the issue. The issue is when, for example, there's a practice with multiple prescribers, but they do not have a name of a prescriber anywhere, or they'll say Dr. X, Y, and Z Incorporated or Dr. X, Y, and Z and Co. Obviously, I cannot just assume that it's the head practitioner who wrote this prescription. Sometimes you will just have a signature and that's it. Maybe a squiggle of a name. So obviously in that situation, your MP number is missing, your name is missing, your qualifications are missing. So when you actually don't put a prescriber's name on a prescription, there's actually a lot wrong there. Usually I will then have to phone and try and confirm. You'd be surprised how many receptionists do not know your MP numbers. Okay, then moving on. Actually, sorry, I just wanted to note, I've come across it with 2 separate practices where a doctor is on leave and they get a locum doctor to fill in their place. And that locum doctor uses their stamp or simply signs on their prescription without noting their own name. Like I said, we get used to your handwriting. The only way I picked this up is because my known doctor suddenly developed a completely different handwriting. When I phoned, they said, no, doctor is on leave. We've got a locum doctor. That particular practice was not willing or able to give me the doctor's name or MP number. That is incredibly scary. That is, again, an exception, but it's happening. Okay, then moving on to MP number. Like we said, we are all used to practice number being the requirement. That changed a number of years ago when I was studying, actually. So I know sometimes our script pads haven't been updated in a while or something like that. But at the end of the day, the MP number needs to be on there. If I'm familiar with the doctor, I will write it in myself. I can quickly check you up on the HPCSA iRegister. If I'm not familiar with you, I'm going to have to phone your receptionist and just verify. And then I will be doing a check on the HPCSA just to make sure you're also registered, because I've been caught with that before as well. Okay, no prescriber's address. It doesn't seem like a major issue, but at the end of the day, what I'm doing is trying to ensure that I am receiving a legitimate prescription from a legitimate prescriber who is registered and practicing in this country. An address goes a long way towards that. Okay. No patient ID or date of birth. I did mention earlier, this is often something that is left off the prescription. Just quickly being able to see the patient's age, just being able to make sure that I'm on the right profile. Those things are invaluable in terms of my time as a pharmacist. Then patient address. It is not a huge concern for me as a person, but especially in the case of your Schedule 6 prescriptions, it is actually a point of failure in an SAPC audit. So when the Pharmacy Council is inspecting us, they check 3 things on a Schedule 6 prescription. They check that the MP number is present, they check that the patient's ID is present, and they check that the patient's address is present. Again, it moves towards that notion that we are not supposed to be guessing. We are supposed to be entirely sure when we are dispensing a Schedule 6 prescription that we know who our patient is, that we are putting it on the right name, that we are ensuring that that patient is traceable should there be any reason to follow up. All right. And then, yeah, I think that's that on that one. Happy? Okay. So again, in the case of any of these things being missing, it is necessary for the pharmacist to intervene. We are happy to do it. We legally have to do it. Okay, maybe that was a lie. Maybe we aren't always happy. But at the end of the day, time is valuable. My time, your receptionist's time, my patient's time, and all the patients in the queue. So this is just a point where we are seeing these things in practice. Maybe you are all perfect. I would be so happy. But at the end of the day, we really are seeing this. There are basic things being left off of prescriptions, and it causes issues at the ground level. Okay. All exclusions should technically be followed up. I should make sure that my prescriptions are perfect. If I was to do that, I would not dispense a single prescription without following up. Unless perhaps it was an EM guidance or something like that. There are now those softwares. But to make sure that patient's name, surname, ID number, address, all of that is on a prescription, it almost never happens, unfortunately. And heaven forbid I turn every patient away. Okay. I've already said most of this. But yeah, it's just when we do actually not follow up, when we do actually take that risk on ourselves, it's risk on us, it's risk on our pharmacy staff. Sometimes we do it because the patients verbally abuse us. They get very, very upset when we can't just do what we need to do quickly and hurry up so that they can get to their meeting. But at the end of the day, this is healthcare. We need to do what we need to do. Okay, that is fine. We've been there. I'm so sorry. There was a point about missing information, but pharmacological information. Okay, for the life of me, that slide seems to be missing. I'll just quickly talk about it a little bit. So just some of the things we also see not properly noted on the prescription. For example, sometimes we have chronic patients. We are used to them. They are our regular patients. Suddenly we see a dosage change with a new prescription. There's no indication that the doctor actually intended to increase or decrease that dosage. We have to phone you. Sometimes there's a case where there's a whole list of medication, especially our cardiac patients, and a medication is suddenly omitted. I have to phone you if you have not indicated stop digoxin, for example. I actually had a case of that a number of years ago where I had a regular patient. The doctor omitted digoxin from the prescription. I tried for a week to try and get hold of the doctor. The receptionist was incredibly unhelpful, unfortunately. I could not get hold of the doctor. I also could not issue the digoxin. And that patient ended up in the ICU within a week. So at the end of the day, yes, we are sometimes very frustrated. Yes, sometimes our frustrations are valid. We do understand that you are incredibly busy. We do understand that you cannot always talk to us, but sometimes we really, really do need to talk to you. Okay. Seem to be missing a beautiful chunk of everything, but that's fine. Just want to see. Okay, where are we here? Legibility of prescriptions. Please mind your toes for this one. Doctors' handwriting has become something of an ongoing joke in the medical community, and that's fine. We keep things lighthearted. We have to. Every now and then, when I'm speaking to a prescriber and confirming what was seen, both of us will have a little bit of a chuckle when we realize what the item actually was. Sometimes it's silly, like one of them was Centrum. So it was actually just a multivitamin from the front shop, but we made sure. But, you know, jokes aside, it can be relatively serious. Contrary to popular belief, I was not taught how to decipher hieroglyphics, beg your pardon, handwriting in university. Forgive me for that one. We had, in the beginning of a lecture, 2 quick slides of some examples, and they said, good luck, you'll get better at it as you go along. And then we moved on. Okay, so at the end of the day, yes, we write a lot. We are aware of this, but it can lead to some major dispensing errors that can be life-threatening. Yes, we go out of our way to confirm. Often we will need another pair of eyes quickly to check. That's why we never work alone. What do you see? You know, we'll look at the dosages. We'll look at the rest of the medication. We'll ask the patient, why did you consult? Okay, before we phone you. And if we really just don't know, we will phone you. Okay. Then the problem with that, though, is that sometimes you are not available. Sometimes you are in consult. Sometimes you are in surgery. What ends up happening is the patient, if they are even willing, and they don't just rip their script away from me and walk out, they will have to come back once we've confirmed. So this leads to delays in treatment. This leads to inconvenience. Again, it's that extra time spent. And then if we are 99.9% certain and we decide not to check with you, that is a risk that we are taking as pharmacists, that we are giving the correct medication. Okay. Oh, I was ahead of myself. Here it is. Apologies. So some of the pharmacological things that I didn't mention includes scripting medications that are actually already discontinued. My favorite at the moment is thrombophab gel. I have been receiving a lot of scripts for it. I don't know if it's actually officially discontinued, but it has been out of stock since I have been a pharmacist. Sometimes you have out-of-stock medications. Maybe the reps haven't gotten to you yet. Obviously, in that sense, we will try to do generics where appropriate. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, there are not generics available, and then we struggle. There are some sort of non-existent dosages that pop up every now and then. My favorite is metronidazole 500 milligrams. In the market, it comes in a 400 and a 200. The tablet is convex. You cannot break it easily. You will not get a guaranteed 100 milligram dosage if you break that 200 milligram tablet. Do I know that you meant 400 milligrams? Yes, I do. Do I still have to phone you? Yes, I do. Okay. We did touch on the contraindications and that kind of a thing where your patients are maybe not disclosing everything to you at once. And then the dosage inconsistencies we did talk about. Okay. Now I would quickly like to look at your telephonic prescriptions. These are often seen as an easy way out for a patient. They want it and they want it now. The problem is we know that there has been no consultation. We know that there is risk on us dispensing medication, knowing that there has been no consultation. Sometimes a patient will walk up to me with their phone in their hand, the doctor already on the phone, and tell me the doctor wants to give me a script. I cannot accept that. I do not know who is on the other end of that phone. I cannot verify who is on the other end of that phone. In those cases, I will ask the patient to kindly hang up, to tell me what the situation is, to talk to me, and then I will, from my own resources, on my own telephone for records, contact the prescriber so that I have record of a telephone conversation with that prescriber. Unfortunately, although this is not your fault, it just donates to an unwillingness of the patients to understand the legal implications of a telephonic prescription. Then going back to what we mentioned earlier, a telephonic prescription may not exceed 7 days of treatment. It must be followed by a valid prescription within 7 days. This almost never happens. You speak to the prescriber, they think their job is done, they move on with their lives. In 2 days' time, they've seen 100 patients, they've forgotten all about it. So then again, this is why most pharmacists will not take the risk to do a Schedule 5 or Schedule 6 telephonic prescription, because if we are audited, if we are quote unquote caught, there will be major repercussions for us and not you. And then something that, although I understand may be frustrating, is incredibly important. It goes back to your relationship with your prescriber. It goes back to knowing your prescriber. It is stipulated that the prescriber of a telephonic prescription must be known to the pharmacist. I cannot be taking a telephonic prescription from a doctor I do not know, from Pretoria or Cape Town, for a patient I do not know. Especially nowadays when we have emails, there are options. Doctors prescribing in the pharmacy. I'm sure none of you have, but sometimes the doctor will come through. They will not introduce themselves as Dr. XYZ. They will not tell you anything. They will ask you for a Schedule 4. And then you have to navigate the conversation. Only then will it come out, no, we are a prescriber. Can I have a piece of paper? So this is something that we navigate. It is difficult, but often we can come right. I do insist with my staff, even if I know you, you come in every week, you come in every month, I will insist that they go and they print out your details from the iRegister, and that will be your prescription pad. Like I mentioned before, I have been caught by this before. The doctor was wonderful. She was very charming. And only after I had dispensed and she had left did the locum tell me that she's not active on the register. I had dispensed Schedule 5s. The reason I did it was because it was done before. So, burned once. Yes. Okay. So at the end of the day, we have to follow that due process. Sometimes, though, we do bump into your ethical gray area, your abusable medications, your high schedule medications, self-prescribing or prescribing for the family. I think the issue here is relatively self-explanatory. There are issues involved. We cannot properly follow up on treatment. We cannot properly follow up and ensure that treatment is being prescribed safely. Then the final kicker, and why I've included this here. All the information we've been talking about, the wonderful lists and lists of information that must be present for a prescription to be legal, now has to be handwritten on that piece of paper. And it is not. So that piece of paper that comes in from a doctor themselves, in front of me, verified, I know this script is legitimate, is often the most illegitimate prescription in my records. The latest and greatest in technology is that people want to WhatsApp their scripts, they want to email their scripts. Fax has sort of died out, but I put it there just because. The problem here is that the source must be verifiable. Usually, I cannot accept a Dr. XYZ at yahoo.com and trust it, because that email address could have been made by anybody, My solution here is to recommend that you put your email address as part of the standard print on your prescriptions. Then on the flip side, sometimes the doctor has already done that. and then this prescription comes from an unrelated email address. Again, I cannot accept that in good confidence. Yes, we can phone, we can verify, we can follow up. Again, it's just that extra step. We are not actually allowed to accept emailed prescriptions from a patient. What we are doing in practice is that we are in general accepting them and making an exception to enforce the rules with Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 prescriptions. SAPC does not distinguish. They say scheduled is scheduled and we must verify. So this is a bit of a widespread problem because it has become, since COVID, it has really become the norm. The patient cannot understand. Dis-Chem doesn't do it. My private pharmacy has never given me an issue. Why are you being difficult? The fun things. I would like to just show you a bit of an extract from an article from SAPC that they released in 2023, making their stance on the matter incredibly clear. Forgive me, I am going to read it. Did you know that dispensing a prescription based on an electronic message sent to a patient and not directly to the pharmacy from an authorized prescriber requires validation by the pharmacy? We will jump down to where it quotes the regulation that I have been talking about, where it says, in the event of a prescription transmitted electronically by means other than an electronic agent, such as your EM guidance, or emailed directly, faxed directly, or communicated verbally, a permanent copy of the prescription shall be made for record purposes. We will have to follow up. It goes on to talk about how during COVID-19 we made a lot of exceptions, but now as life returns to normal, there are certain practices in place that place an additional burden on the pharmacy in terms of the authentication and validity of such prescriptions, one being electronic prescriptions presented at the pharmacy by patients for dispensing. Electronically transmitted prescriptions sent directly from an authorized prescriber to a pharmacy, as a general rule, do not present a validity or authentication problem. As such, the SAPC encourages pharmacists to make this the norm when receiving prescriptions that are electronically transmitted. My problem there is that I am not the one sending the prescription. So it is very difficult for me to be the one to make it the norm. And then it just goes on to highlight how when a prescription is sent directly to a patient, this can be dangerous, as one needs to consider that the prescription must be authenticated. The problem here is, again, this patient can send this prescription to multiple pharmacies, which they do address. The question that is asked is, can a pharmacist be sure that a patient that presents a prescription sent to the patient's WhatsApp or email has not been presented to another pharmacy already, or that such a prescription has not been changed in any way? No, we cannot. There is no database currently that links different pharmacies to an individual patient. There is no ID number that tells me everything, unfortunately. And then just why I am talking about this, because yes, it's not your problem, but it most certainly is mine. As the authentication process of a prescription now rests on the pharmacist, the SAPC advises that pharmacists, in order to avoid being charged with dispensing without a valid prescription, as far as possible, only to accept electronically transmitted prescriptions sent directly to the pharmacy by authorized prescribers. Remember, as a pharmacist, you are bound to the Pharmacy Act, regulations, and rules, not the patient. And therefore, it is you who could face disciplinary action if you accept invalid and unauthenticated prescriptions. I think that speaks for itself. Okay, just as a side note, I understand that this is not very widely used. I know there was a bit of a presentation earlier. I don't know if any of you saw it. I see that EM Guidance does have a little stand up. I would encourage all of you to have a look at whether it is suitable for your practice or not to use prescribing programs like EM Guidance. it is incredibly secure. It is incredibly helpful because now through this platform, the patient can send me the email directly because I can be 100% sure that that script was not emailed elsewhere because the app sends me a little email and tells me everywhere that it's been sent. If it has been sent to another pharmacy and the patient says, no, they didn't have the stock, I didn't get it there, I now know exactly which pharmacy to contact and verify. Yes, there's an added step, but I can be sure I can assist my patient without harming myself. The system is actually very, very sophisticated. Your patient can give you access via a one-time PIN. You then retain access to that patient's profile and you can see all of their prescriptions. I did it the other day with a patient. I thought it was very cute. She came back the next week. I didn't have to get access from her again. It was there. The access lasted. So now for my chronic patients, my regular patients in the pharmacy, I can assist them easily and safely. I've said a lot. I've made a few jokes. I've been serious. I hope I've given you something to think about. At the end of the day, do I expect you all to run back to your practice and change everything immediately? No, of course not. Rome was not built in a day, and neither was medicine. But for the important parts, I hope we can have learned from each other. I hope we can assist each other so that we can all practice safely and ensure that our patients are receiving the best care. I urge all of you, so far as possible, get in touch with the other healthcare providers. Get in touch with the pharmacists. If there are any pharmacists in the audience, get to know your regular doctors. It makes the process so much easier. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions from anybody?
Hi.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. I don't have a question. But what I would like to say is this has been very informative.
Thank you.
This has been so much, very much important. And I was just talking to my colleague here that there's a number of things that will change when I get back.
Thank you.
Because I think they have to. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. I think sometimes nobody tells you.
Thank you. Indeed, Sarah, we were talking about it. Thank you so much. I'm repenting if you understand what that means. It means we've just been doing wrong things and we didn't know the correct things that we have to do. But the one question that I have that you didn't touch, as a doctor, do I have, is there anything that I can prescribe to my family? Is there any scheduled medication that I can prescribe for my children? Because
Legally,
I've had a problem with my son who was on Ritalin. They refused me to prescribe it. So, I mean, where do I...
most pharmacists will.
Yes.
Legally, there is no restriction. It boils down to ethics. From my side, it also, again, it depends. Are you a regular customer of mine? Do I have history that your child has been taking Ritalin from a normal prescriber and you are in an emergency situation? At the end of the day, yes, we have laws, we have regulations, but we are allowed to work within them to ensure that our patients are cared for. I would, if I had a history and I was aware of the patient's medication and you are a legal prescriber, I would allow you to prescribe him once off. But if you were the doctor prescribing his Ritalin on a chronic basis, I would have questions. I would have questions to make sure that that child is being overseen correctly. If you were a psychiatrist, it's a different story because a psychiatrist can manage that. But in medicine, we usually do not, and I'm sure you guys will also agree, we usually do not recommend that you handle the management of a close family member's medicine, or, you know, a surgeon will very rarely operate on their own family member and that kind of a thing. So it's for those same reasons where it just blurs the lines a little bit. Like I say, legally, there's no problem. But the question comes in to say, have you received an outside opinion to make sure that this dosage is still working for your child? Yes, a lot of the times the mother will have the best insights. I can have that conversation with you, no problem. But I will be having that conversation with you. So at the end of the day, it just boils down to, as pharmacists, we don't just hand out prescriptions. We ensure that medicine is being used appropriately and safely. And that's my answer.
Thank you so much. Anybody else?
Sorry for that.
Hi there.
Hi.
So you were mentioning about medication being left off. So let's say I have got my chronic patient that comes to you every single month, and it's a hypertensive, diabetic, asthmatic patient with a list of about 12 medications on, and I am changing. Are you expecting us to write every time when we change medication or when we have stopped something?
Not necessarily. So, sorry, I failed to elaborate a bit more there. We would usually engage with the patient in that sense. We would say, did you discuss changing your medication with doctor? Did doctor say that they're wanting to leave something off? Did doctor say that they're wanting to increase or reduce the dosage? The time that I will have to check is if the patient doesn't know or if they are unsure. I promise you, sometimes what you say to them goes in one ear and out the other. They will come to us and they don't know. So in that sense, if the patient says, oh yes, no, doctor said that they're changing this, which means they're going to stop that one, I'm happy. What some doctors do, which is appreciated, is they will quickly write, stop Aspivor, or increase Aspivor, or next to the 40 milligram, they'll write a little arrow just to show that, yes, they're aware that they were on a 20 milligram before, and then now it's a 40 milligram. Remember, your prescription is as much a communication with me as it is a legal document. So at the end of the day, anything that you can and are willing to do to make it more clear is fantastic because it just avoids problems. And the problems we are talking about is people's lives.
Okay. And then the second one, I think it's a frustration both for doctors and probably for pharmacists, is medical aid formularies.
Oh, yes. And they change so often.
Because we don't always have the time to sit there and go through each and every formulary to see whether they're going to give you Prospan or they're not going to give you Prospan. If we write up something, are pharmacists allowed to say, listen here, your medical aid doesn't pay for this cough syrup, but they'll pay for this one?
So that is nuanced. I would say it very much depends on the patient. If I have an immunocompromised patient who has serious comorbidities, it's not a clear cut yes or no. I will phone you and ask you, may I change it? For a clear-cut, uncomplicated situation, that is a Schedule 2, a Schedule 1, or potentially a Schedule 0. That is well within my scope to change, and I will feel comfortable doing it. But I will not change it on your practice number. I will change it on mine. So I will then take that. Oh, sorry. I think my mic. I will then take that item off of the prescription and I will charge it separately under the pharmacy's practice number and make a note on the prescription to say medical aid didn't pay or patient is paying cash or whatever the situation is. So it will very much depend on the item. One thing I will just add that sort of popped into my head when you spoke, when it comes to formularies of scheduled medications, yes, we are allowed to change them. Very often your patients are reluctant because it's not what you wrote. I will ask a patient, do you want the original or do you want a generic? They'll say, no, give me the originals. And then I will say to them, your doctor has scripted a generic. What would you like me to do? Give me what the doctor wrote. They don't know what is the original and what is the generic. They know what you trust. So in a sense, where you are trying to abide by formulary, but you are unsure, tell the patient, let them know that it is okay for the pharmacist to substitute to the correct formulary item. Or even what I tell the reps to tell the prescribers, in brackets, just write generic. Then I can point to that word and say, look, your doctor is okay with a generic. It makes a huge difference. We're dealing with psychology as much as we are dealing with other comorbidities, you know.
Anybody else? Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm sure you all now have a little bit of a better idea what the pharmacists go through. And I'm sure the handwriting thing, I think, is still... I'm going to do an ethics course for the doctors on handwriting skills.